Andrew Miller, Tarik LaCour, Shane Black from Hook'emHeadlines.com. We're coming back at y'all tonight. First time that we've had all three of us on a show in a while for, get that out of the way. But, we got some big news for Texas football and just the SEC as a whole today. The SEC announced its 8-game schedule for what will be 16 member schools next season. For Texas, the schedule features 4 home games, 3 true road games, and 1 neutral site. And we keep OU for Red River at the Texas State Fairgrounds, the Cotton Bowl. Also get what I believe to be 3 very manageable home games and then 1 difficult one. We'll see how Florida shapes up in 24, but you have Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Georgia at home. On the road, you get 2 rivals, Arkansas and Texas A&M, and then what should be another very manageable road game in Vanderbilt. So all told, you got to like the schedule. I mean, even though like Florida is kind of down right now under Billy Napier, that's still a fun game to get in Austin. I don't think you could ask much more out of it. Like, at least you get Georgia at home, potentially the number 1 team at the time. I mean, we'll see. It's still a long way out, but it's kind of like facing Alabama at home last season in a sense where, like, you even look good just by losing by 1 point. I mean, you don't want to take that mantra into the SEC, but especially if that's like an early season game, I think that bodes pretty well for Texas. I mean, we'll see when push comes to shove. I like the schedule. I think we were speaking off air briefly. I think we're all in agreement there that we like the schedule. I did my 3 takeaways from the schedule a few hours ago, posted on the site. I said that, between them valuing the rivalry or the SEC valuing rivalries the way they did with scheduling and just with having a pretty manageable outlook for the schedule next year, you gotta be happy about what happened.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the schedule was about as good of a draw as you could have hoped for. I mean, Chip Brown had leaked late last night, maybe early this morning, that we would be playing Georgia. So that was a very good, I think that's a good thing to be playing them at home, not on the road. I really don't want to go to Athens. The one thing I guess that bothered me about the schedule was that we're playing both A&M and Arkansas on the road. I thought, given the fact that they gave A&M that game fine, but my thinking was, okay, if we're going to play Arkansas and A&M every year, we should swap out one's home, one's on the road, then flip back every year. But so, again, you're having that problem of now you're only playing a rival in your home stadium twice every 2 years kind of a thing. So it'd be nice to have, more traditional rivalries playing one at home, because you're also the neutral site, obviously, with Oklahoma. But I mean, as far as draw, you don't have to go to Death Valley, which would have been really rough if you had A&M, Arkansas, and Death Valley in the same year. So that Florida, I think Florida will be much better in year 3 under Napier, assuming he makes it to year 3. Georgia obviously is the premier program in college football. Mississippi State, you can't really know what to think about them just yet, with new coaching regime there, and then the road games. We already talked about them, and of course Vanderbilt. If you lose to Vanderbilt, that's worse than losing to Kansas. I mean, you can't do that. So, overall, I mean, I think that you came out of it really good. So how good you should feel about going into the SEC is really going to be determined by the 2022 season, because you're going to lose. You could potentially lose 10 to 11 players to the draft, and so you need to have another top 5 recruiting class as you head into the SEC. But if you do that with 3 top 5 classes, I think you'll be more than ready to go, hit the ground running. Also, one thing, Andrew, you didn't mention, we're playing ULM. That'll be the other out-of-conference game that was added just a couple hours ago. So
that's Colorado State, too.
And Colorado State and Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this off air. I would prefer not to have to play both who I think will be the national champion and the runner-up in the same year. But you can't win them all. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, Tarik, I agree with you. I did think it was odd getting Arkansas and A&M on the road. Obviously, there's been the Twitter feud back and forth the past couple of weeks about who deserves the home game, whether that be in College Station or Austin. I honestly didn't have much of a stand either way on that. You can give it to the Aggies, fine. But yeah, considering we're technically the away team for the Cotton Bowl as well, that means all three traditional rivals, Texas will technically be the away team. I did think that was odd, but I thought it was great that you were able to get all three rivals on the schedule. Then you have that marquee matchup with Georgia coming to Austin, and then the other four manageable games. You mentioned we don't know how Florida is going to be in 24. If Lagway is the starting guy as a true freshman, advantage Horns. And then getting Kentucky and Mississippi State, those are very winnable games coming to Austin. And then Vandy on the road. So I thought it was a perfect mix. You got the three rivals, you got one really marquee game, and then four other manageable games where you could easily win all four of those. So all in all, I think Texas came out as a winner, specifically compared to what Oklahoma was dealt. So yeah, I'm happy with this schedule. It'll be interesting to see how it progresses year to year. You mentioned, Tarik, about if those rivalry games are just going to flip home and home, and if we do play them every year, that's going to be a little odd. And those even number years are going to hurt having to go to Fayetteville and College Station. But yeah, all in all, happy with the schedule, and I think Texas fans should, be cautiously optimistic, not only for 2023, but when you head into the SEC in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, y'all kind of mentioned, well, at least Tarik, you brought up the point that I was going to say next. In terms of the scheduling, I think we're all on the same page that, yeah, it would have been nice, especially since we played on the road at Arkansas in 2021, to not have to do that again in 2024. At this point, it just kind of feels like a home and home non-conference schedule. And I'm actually going to stick to the same thing as you, Tarik. I think that the biggest like challenge you avoided, or the biggest landmine you avoided here, maybe that's a better word for it, is LSU and Death Valley. I mean, that's never a fun one. That's never an easy one. I would say
you don't need your new quarterback being chased down in Death Valley by Harold Perkins. It's not a pretty sight.
I mean, I think LSU is going to be their floor is probably going to be like a top 15 team over the next 2 years. And so, yeah, I mean, either way, that would be a really, really tough game. I'm happy too that we avoid Tennessee on the road. I think that would have been a tough draw. I mentioned that in my article. I think Tennessee could be a fun game in the future, but Tennessee and LSU are the two that I'm happiest to avoid, especially on the road. I think Tennessee at home could have been interesting, but they have a lot of rivalries to fit in. Like, you don't want to sever their Georgia. Wait, did they land Georgia? I would imagine so. I have a hard time believing they took away Georgia, Tennessee. Yeah, they still play Georgia.
And they still play Bama too, right?
Yeah, and Florida, and they have Vanderbilt. And they're considering like Oklahoma this weird type of rivalry too. I don't
why.
Because they had maybe because of those mid-20, like the SEC Network was at least talking about it. Like they had those mid-2010s games with like Baker Mayfield, Josh Dobbs. But yeah, anyway, so those are the two things I'm happy about those are the two things I'm happiest about avoiding in terms of road games. I mean, I don't know if y'all have anything else you would want to add that you're like happy that we avoided, or that you would have liked to see, any teams you would have liked to see us play, or things to watch in the future.
No, I mean, I'm just glad that they preserved the rivalries. I think that we're going to go to a 9-game conference schedule probably very soon. So whoever you missed, you're going to get them soon enough anyway. I just would have wished that. I mean, the only thing is I just didn't like basically all of your rivalry games are going to be on the road one year and home, rather than kind of a mismatch. But no, I think besides that, it's a doable schedule. I'm very curious as to see, as you saw, you might have seen it like this a week or two ago. Texas and Oklahoma renewed to keep going at the Cotton Bowl, but both athletic directors said there'd be significant upgrades to the Cotton Bowl to make it a better experience. So
it's awful in parts of that, man.
Right.
I live
and
about.
I hope one of the upgrades is playing that game under the lights, because I don't like the 11 or 2:30 kickoff. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a whole side rant here. There's a whole. I've been to the Cotton Bowl for a couple other things. I went there for a FC Barcelona. Was it Barcelona or Madrid? It was one of those teams playing Juventus, and I mean that's a huge draw in the U.S. obviously, and they packed with like 67,000 people, but they didn't expand out the gates like they do at the state fair, and so you really get an understanding of the lack of just facilities, concession availability, bathrooms. Dude, it's hot in there. Like, that thing needs an overhaul.
Be that as it may, I'm actually I feel a little. I looked at Oklahoma's schedule. I don't know if you saw this, Shane, but I was like, who didn't they get? It seemed like they got everybody. Like it was straight murderers row. You got on the road LSU, on the road Auburn. Like Alabama comes. And I'm just thinking, like, okay, besides Georgia, they got like everybody else, because they got LSU and Tennessee.
Yeah,
and both of the Alabama schools.
Yeah, they got the SEC West schedule, and then throw in Tennessee with probably Nico in there on top of that. So, yeah, I mean, just briefly, like if we want to talk about OU, Venables has got to win some games in 23. Because if he doesn't, and the seat gets even hotter before the 24 season, that's not a schedule you want to, have to rely on winning 8 games to save your job. Because, I mean, man, like you said, that it's going to be tough to do. And I would say this about the Texas schedule as well. Obviously, like you mentioned, Tark, we're probably switching to 9 games, maybe by 25 or 26. But if the balance is kept where, you keep kind of a couple rivals and then the rest of the opponents are pretty fluid, I think Texas was given like a good balance, and there aren't going to be years that are skewed way harder or way easier. And I think, especially in a 12-team playoff system, that's going to bode well for the Longhorns, because you're going to have, those Alabamas, Georgias, LSUs of the world on there. But it seemed like the bottom half of the SEC got evened out. Obviously, it's not going to work directly where you're going to get 8 one year and 8 the next year. But just looking at our schedule and who we missed as well, I think it's going to be pretty even going forward. Tough to predict, but that was just kind of a thought I had as well.
This is the last thing I really talked about in my article as it pertained to the SEC schedule release. So where do y'all think, and it's still like too early to like definitively say, but like, do y'all think, given the manageable schedule in the SEC, that like looking forward, especially if Texas has a really solid final year in the Big 12, say win the Big 12 title, do you think that expectations are going to be competing for an SEC title right away?
Okay. Let's Shane, can I play devil's advocate here?
Go for it.
There's two minds about that. One reason that you could say yes would be, even though you're losing, let's assume Quinn Ewers is gone, and you're losing all 3 of your receivers, you are returning basically all of your offensive line, and they're going to be juniors and things at that point. Kelvin Banks will be a top 5 pick. You'll probably, return a lot of your edge players, like Ethan Burke will be coming back probably. I expect him to have a good year, and he'll certainly be filled out and have the body structure by the time we go to the SEC. A lot of our backups will be coming back, and they'll have received a lot of playing time, like Jalen Gilbo, these other guys. So you could see Texas being competitive enough that if things just broke their way a couple of times, maybe it could work out. And of course, the other thing is the transfer portal. You can fill a lot of needs there, especially if you do well. People would want to come and fill in for that. So that's that. On the other hand, I just can't pencil in that type of thing, when you have so much uncertainty at quarterback, that will be, you'll be breaking either Arch Manning or Malik Murphy. You're going to be losing all of your receivers. You'll be losing most of your starting defensive line, and Jalen Ford, Catalan, Ryan Watts. So you're losing a lot. So I think you could be competitive in the SEC in the sense of you could maybe catch a break here or there. Like maybe if you got, because you get Georgia at home, maybe you could pull an upset there, or maybe you lose to Georgia, but you can everything else is manageable. So maybe you win the rest of the SEC games. That something like that could happen, but it wouldn't be the expectation. I mean, even if Texas, and this isn't going to happen, but if Texas won the national championship, you still wouldn't pencil them in to win the SEC the next year. There's just too many questions.
So let just quickly, if we looked at it right now, Florida at home, you're favored. Kentucky at home, you're favored. Mississippi State at home, you're favored. Georgia at home, you're an underdog. So that's 3 home favorites. Vandy on the road, you'll be a favorite. That's 4. Then you have Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. I'd assume we'd be a slight favorite, but Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl and A&M and Arkansas on the road, kind of pick'ems, probably a couple points either way. So that's 4 games you're clearly favored in. 1 game you're clearly an underdog, and 3 kind of pick'ems. And I think we'd all agree that it'd probably take a 7-1 record to make the SEC championship. And even at that, I think, say Georgia dominates, goes 8-0. I think there might be another team at 7-1 too. So you'd have to get the tiebreaker to break your way. So I think it is an uphill battle. But like you said, Tarik, there is kind of a path there. If you can steal one against Georgia, especially Andrew, you mentioned this at the beginning, hopefully get that game earlier in the season. That could kind of, propel you upwards, especially if Texas is rolling off a high of a really strong 2023 year. So some people think that it's going to be, a long adjustment period for the Longhorns in the SEC. I don't really see that being the case. Tarik, you mentioned the O-line's going to be in their 3rd year. I think Texas is going to translate pretty well, but having expectations to win the conference, right away is a little silly. That said, it wouldn't shock me in the slightest. But given the fact they haven't won a Big 12 title in 14 years, I think that's right. Going into the SEC and winning in year 1, would be a bit surprising.
I guess the word I was looking for there was more of a dark horse SEC.
I think dark horse is fair. I think that's fair.
I could see, Andrew, I'll say this. I could see Texas sneaking into the playoff in the 12 among 12 teams more than I would say winning the SEC.
No, I mean,
But the thing about winning the SEC is, and people have been saying, well, when you go to 12 or 16, if it expands, that those championships don't matter. No, they'll matter a lot, because you're going to want to have that bye week after that.
Yeah.
After a brutal schedule, like, okay, give me another week off. Let them beat each other up. Let us game plan. We're fine. But go ahead.
Yeah, here's where my mind was going on this, and this is where I should have started the conversation entirely, is the way I framed this in the article, and I think I could see this happening, is, let's say, I think it's realistic this fall to say that Texas comes away as a 2 or 3 loss team this season, winning the Big 12. Cool. That finishes you in the top 10 this season, probably, depending on what happens in postseason, bowl game, whatever. I could see, assuming we do have a lot of pieces returning next year, good recruiting class, good portal class, that Texas is ranked in the top 15 preseason polls. I could see expectations starting to get a little out of hand entering the SEC.
I agree, but that's only because Texas expectations are always out of hand.
Yeah. It's different, though, when you're heading into the SEC for the first year, like you said.
But it won't be, because national pundits who don't get into the weeds, like, let's take out Bruce Feldman, who I have enormous respect for. The other talking heads, they're just going to look at, Texas had 3 top 5 recruiting classes. They should have no problem in the SEC, because the only people that are recruiting better are going to be Alabama, Georgia, and maybe LSU, but maybe not. and you're not even playing two of those teams. You're only playing Georgia, and you get Georgia at home. So I could see them blowing it out of proportion. But I agree with everything else you said. The one thing I would say, though, about if Texas loses 3 games this year, that will be seen as kind of a disappointment of the season. I think you have to win 10 regular season games this year. Now, you could win 9 and still get to the Big 12 and win it, but really you need to go into the Big 12 championship with at least a chance of getting into the playoff for it to be a successful year, I think.
So I would pose this question to y'all, and I think it becomes a little more blurred lines because of the 12-team playoff, and just like success is going to be measured a little different. But how many years would Sark get in the SEC without winning an SEC title before he'd be let go?
That would depend on how many times he got in the playoff. If he was getting in the playoff most years, I don't think people would care.
Yeah.
I think that although people would probably wish okay, we'd like to add more hardware and add more things to DKR and things like that. I think division titles still matter, kind of like they matter in the NFL, because they do help if you're hosting a game or getting a week off or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it wouldn't tie us directly to his fate. Lots of guys who don't win the SEC get huge extensions as long as they're kind of winning and being competitive. So
fair.
But having said that, this will add to that, and I might actually write a post about this soon. Sark needs to go into the SEC having had an extension already. He can't go in on the original contract. If he goes in with the original contract, you're in trouble.
I'm going to agree with part of what Tarik said. It is an interesting question, Shane. So, I think of it this way. I look at it like a Shaka Smart light, where Shaka Smart won the Big 12 tournament the year he was fired. And Texas was a really, really good regular season team that year. But come the postseason, because postseason is what matters in college basketball, if it were a 4-team tournament in college basketball, it would be a different conversation. Hell, Shaka Smart might still be the head coach. I don't know. That's a completely different hypothetical. But I think when you get to a 12-team playoff, I think Sark is a smart enough coach to be able to get there. But what happens when he gets there? And I think just obviously making it there in the first place will be more important than conference titles. Unfortunately, and Tarik, you kind of hit the nail in the head on that. I think he needs to get a year at some point between now and 2025 that he can put on his resume and say, yeah, this is what Texas can be, because he's got 3 years before the 12-team playoff. And that's a lot of room for mediocre seasons. It's a lot of room for, some criticism to come his way if he doesn't get the job done. So I think the postseason is going to matter more than anything else once the 12-team playoff comes around. I know, Tarik, you had mentioned this in a show we did the other day, that the scheduling is going to be the scope of scheduling and how people view it is going to be so different once we start approaching the 12-team playoff in the SEC than it is now, where now you like those big games. You have the 12-team playoff. The SEC is always going to be strong. For the most part, you're going to want to avoid those teams.
Yeah, when we go to the non-conference schedule, I don't want to see Michigan and Ohio State or USC or Penn State on the schedule. I'll see you in the playoffs. I'm already playing Arkansas and A&M and Oklahoma, and probably seeing one of Alabama, LSU, or Georgia every year, probably. So, I
think Auburn is going to end up getting pretty good again here soon, too.
Right, with Hugh Freeze. So, yeah. Now, you could say, well, Saban will probably leave pretty soon and things like that, but I still think Alabama will still be pretty good. So, yeah, there's just no reason to schedule those big out-of-conference games. Heck, when Texas went to the SEC, I would have been making calls to Michigan saying, yeah, we don't need to do this game anymore. We'll pay you. But we're not going to play. there's no there's no reason to play this game. I mean, in a way, ironically, this is again Texas scheduling a game that gets in the way of them like getting off to a hot start. So we've already been over a decade where Texas hasn't started off 3-0, and I wouldn't bet on it happening this year, and probably not next year either. So all because you're scheduling Alabama, Michigan, all these other games, and it's not about running from competition. It's just about you at the University of Texas. You want to be nationally competitive. Okay, well that means you can compete with the big boys when it really matters. You don't need to do it right out of the gate. I mean, there's a reason that Georgia is not scheduling Clemson every year to start the year off. They'll do that once in a while, but and things were different back in the BCS era, in this 12-team playoff era, and I'm predicting we'll eventually get to 14 or 16. You're just not going to need to play those games.
Yeah. Well, and another thing, in that 26 year, that could be Arch Manning's final year at Texas. I know that's looking a ways down the road, but people talked about 2023 shaping up to be a big one for the Longhorns in terms of national prominence for a while, and here we are. Texas looks like they can have a big year. 26, I think, will shape up to be a big one too.
I think Arch has probably gone up to 25, but
you think he's going to be a 2-year starter and go?
He might. I could see Malik and Arch being 1-year guys.
Quick quarterback turnover, but doesn't matter. We're recruiting at a level to replace them too. Not replace, but overall though, I'm happy with how things turned out today. Hopefully we have more positive news to cover on the recruiting trail as well, but I'll have more videos on that coming up later this week. Over the next few weeks, content wise, very recruiting centric for sure. But yeah, y'all got anything else?
Well, I got fall camp coming up really soon too, so
excited for sports to get back, especially with no College World Series to watch. I mean, I'll watch it, but
okay. Talking about opening wounds, it's too soon. I can't talk about it yet.
I wasn't going to bring it up. Yeah, I'm good.
It's too soon.
I fell off the elliptical at the gym while I was watching that on my phone. I couldn't believe. I was like trying to see what it had. Yeah, okay. You know what? We're not. Yeah, like you said. Anyway, for Andrew Miller, Tarik LaCour, Shane Black at Hook'emHeadlines.com. First of many SEC videos to come. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Hook 'em.